afternoon, everyone. According to the Independent Electricity System Operator, Ontario's energy demand is projected to rise by 75% by 2050, from 151 terawatt hours in 2025 to 264 terawatt hours. So with that, we can start with the big picture of the grid. And Mike, the first question would be for you. From an IESO or regulatory perspective, what is the single most underappreciated challenge in planning for Ontario's energy future?
Thanks. Great question. Can I get a show of hands for everyone that's seen our annual planning outlook? All right, well, I see quite a few people on this one IESO employee there. So the annual planning outlook is really where we compile all of our planning information over the course of the year. It's our base case for trying to look out into the distant future. And what's interesting there is there's a lot of modules attached to it. I think that's where we see the real challenges in planning. One of those modules, we take a look at our needs, and we run, it's called a capacity expansion model. It looks at all the different costs and characteristics of resources to develop the system of the future. And some of the biggest issues we have in there is how much can we build? You mentioned the massive demand growth that we're facing. We're going to need a lot of resources for that, a lot of transmission infrastructure. When we look at the limiting factors for how much you can build, there are supply chains, there's access to capital, and there's also a human element of it. You need to have the skilled labor in place to develop those resources, to plan those resources, to engineer those resources. I think it's a reminder to all of us that behind all the technical data, behind all the information, are people, whether it's the planners, whether it's the skilled labor that's actually building in resources, or whether it's the customers that are ultimately impacted by the plans.
I see. So, well, shifting from the perspective of consumers, Brad, if we, as Ontario's grid evolves, if you think about large energy consumers, how do you think their businesses is changing in terms of costs and competitiveness?
Well, there's a huge, I'm going to dive right into the deep end on this, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Chris, you're at Queen's Park every day. You understand what the art of the segue is. Right? You get a question and you segue to what you really want to talk about. And there is a huge gorilla in this room. And Mike knows it. In fact, the document that you referred to, the annual planning outlook, and congratulations and thank you for that. It is sometimes hard to get real data in the power sector that hasn't been, and I'm following Minister of Energy, politically changed. That's a source we can go to, and we know that's the real data. And this year's AMPCO and annual planning outlook is somewhat shocking. Not somewhat, it's very shocking to us. Not that we couldn't see it coming, but the magnitude of the increases that, not just our industry, but ratepayers are going to face over the next 3 years is really disconcerting. And that affects everybody in this room. If you're suppliers to industry, if you've got technologies you're bringing to help transform our sector, it's a very, very significant, serious, I was going to say challenge, but that's too polite. This is what you call a real problem. And I'll explain why. We're looking at 165% cost increase over the next 3 years. It isn't even over the next 20 years, 3 years. 165% cost increase. For your average industrial users, heavy users, you'd be looking at between 30 and 55% cost increase to that. So think about the world we're living in today. Okay, pre-Trump, that would be a really serious problem. Post-Trump, well, I wish it was post-Trump. During the Trump regime with the tariffs, the tariffs are pounding the crap out of these guys. And my chair, Jeff Anthofer, is here, chair of AMPCO. He's also the, I never get his position right, the manager of energy at Gerdau out in Whitby, but he manages for 6 different jurisdictions. So this guy knows his stuff. And the steel industry. And Jeff explained this to me. I was never aware of this. 50% of their cost structure is energy. So imagine 50% of your cost structure going up by 50%. And then imagine this is happening at a time when you're fighting for your life. You're laying people off. You're not sure whether you can run a ship from week to week. And Gerdau, I don't think, is quite in that spot, but many of our members are, because a lot of their steel or exports. The auto sector. Oshawa, we saw 350 people announced to be laid off in January. We're hurting. With that kind of a cost increase and a power increase, it's going to be hugely challenging. And it's going to require a great deal of effort from all of us in the sector to find solutions to mitigate some of those increases. So there's the gorilla in the room, and this is relatively new, so I don't expect a lot of you would know that yet. But it's the reality AMPCO's living now, and we're going to have to work very, very hard. And we want to open up that creative thinking opportunity to the entire sector. This isn't something that's going to be resolved just in the industrial sector. We're all going to have to work together to get through these next three, and actually it'll be 7 years of increases ultimately. I can explain more on that later.
Well, actually, adding to that, Nick, can you comment on what outside forces would you say are the biggest disruptors shaping Ontario's grid in the next few years?
Yeah, maybe I'll just kind of take a string this kind of through both of your guys' answers there. But I think one of the biggest disruptors that we're really talking about here is a technological disruptor. And the way we've been thinking about the transition accelerator is that there's a big opportunity with this disruptor, but there's also a bunch of challenges, which I think we're hearing about. But this technological disruptor, I'm sure people have been reading different think pieces and articles kind of going out there with different terms, but it's the electric tech revolution, the era of electricity. But we're talking about just a new way to use electricity for so many of our energy needs. And this is a technological innovation story, and we're starting to see it reflected in like the APO 75% increase. I think this era of increasing electricity demand, and I know I've had conversations with folks in this room even just about whether that materializes or not, but I really think we're now in an era where we're going to see a lot more growth that we haven't seen in 20 years. And that's putting pressures on the people that have to build it, the planning, all of that, as well as prices and costs. Some of our own analysis shows that there is going to be upward pressure on rates, and it's going to be a challenge that needs to be to be addressed, and solutions there. I'm sure we'll get into that more later. But I do want to underscore, though, in terms of the opportunity, though, and the disruption of what's actually represented by that 75% load growth is just way more efficient use of energy, way more productive use of energy. We are seeing advances in batteries, in electric motors, in power electronics, compute, all of these things coming together that are just opening up so many possibilities to use electricity for the things that we need, and inventing new ways to use it too, like AI and data centers. And so those two things, there's a lot of opportunity to do things a lot better, a lot cleaner, but as both of my panels here mentioned, there's going to be challenges underneath that. I think they're addressable, but it's a big opportunity and challenge at the same time.
Let me jump in for just 1 second. Nick, I want to thank you, because you're in a very challenging area, getting technologies and startups coming through, and there's some of those folks here today, and I want to thank you, because ultimately some of the solutions may come from those startup companies. But when you talk about the 75% increase in demand, I'm not sure that even covers it all. I've been to lots of conferences. When you look at when electrification comes in, and it's coming, it might be delayed a bit because of politics, whatever, but it's coming. When people turn to electric vehicles, boom, it's going to take off quick. Our companies are already, many of them are making billion-dollar investments in going towards electrification, electric arc and steel and other technologies. They're making billion-dollar investments. It's coming. Buildings, same thing. When we get to that point where electrification is almost full bore, and our guys go to plug in their electric arc furnaces, and we have people already that are delayed because they don't have access to the power yet, and affordable power nonetheless. That's a challenge. That's a generational challenge. We can't not let our people, our generation down by failing to have that grid to a point where it needs to be, so that when that transformation point takes place, we don't have affordable and reliable power available, not just for our companies, but for those folks that are finally decided they're going to buy an electric vehicle and plug it in their cars. So I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, actually,
it's so important what you just raised.
That takes us to what I was going to actually turn to Monica on last. Into the future, like what would you say in the next 5 to 10 years? What would be the changes in the Ontario electricity market that businesses should be preparing for?
Absolutely, thanks. I think Brad's touched on some of it, and this is why we provide, planning outlook in the modules for is for that transparency, so that the sector and the industrial consumers can see the data and where it's heading. So what Brad's talking about for these increases is looking at the electricity market price. So in Ontario, I just have a little bit of cost allocation here. In Ontario, we have contracts and regulated rates for the vast majority of our supplies. And then those generators or storage resources can go and play in the electricity market and they'll earn some revenues. But those revenues typically don't compensate them for all their contract costs or their regulated rates. So the rest of that amount comes out of something called the global adjustment. And we have two different types of customers. There's Class A customers, which are large industrial consumers and other large users like, for example, universities. And then we have Class B customers, which is residential and smaller commercial customers. So for the smaller Class B customers, they don't have any opportunity to avoid paying any of the global adjustment. So the global adjustment acts as a natural hedge. So if electricity market prices increase, the global adjustment decreases, and it's a natural hedge for smaller volume customers. For large industrial customers, you may recall the Industrial Conservation Initiative mentioned at the beginning. That enables them to avoid paying some portion or even all of the global adjustment charge. And that's based on their ability to curtail load on the 5 highest peak days of the year. So if you're a large industrial customer and you are able to curtail all of that and avoid paying the global adjustment, then you have a lot of exposure to market rates. So we're seeing in our forecast the change on the system is we have Pickering retiring, we have demand increasing, so less baseload supply, higher demand. The resulting impact is increasing market costs and decreasing global adjustment. So of course, if you're avoiding the global adjustment, then for you that means increasing market prices. So one of the changes that's evolving for Class A customers that you will be seeing changing in that market price of electricity, but for smaller volume customers, you won't be seeing that because it will be naturally hedged by the global adjustment.
So then, Brad, what are you hearing from your members in response to these market factors?
I'll actually give you the answer to that one. It's got a segue. It changes hard. Change is always hard. And I want to start off, I do want to thank the ISO. Changing to a new market, that's a very, very large order. The ISO reached out long before the market clicked in. They reached out during, and now that we're in sort of the post-launch time, they're there and they've worked very closely with AMPCO and our members to try to resolve some of the challenges that you would expect when a new market went into place. So thank you for that. We really do appreciate the work you're doing on our behalf. Are there challenges? Yeah, there are glitches. When I say glitches, it sounds like that's minor, but when you're dealing with multi-million-dollar decisions based on peaking in power and making decisions about whether you are or not, a glitch is a big deal. There's been times when data hasn't been available, it's been paused, and the ISO would be as concerned about that as us. So it's things that need to be fixed, and they're working on fixes for this. And that was not unexpected, to be honest. I think our biggest concern is twofold. One is cost. There's no question that, we're hearing it from experts, this isn't just from us, that there's some structural cost within the new market, and that's been identified. And that's not that seasons or variables or anything like that. So we are going to be paying. We feel that experts are telling us in the new market. Given everything else I've talked about the elephant in the room and the gorilla in the room, it's just sort of piling on. It's not anywhere close to what we've seen in those increases. In fact, we don't know exactly what it is. The biggest concern we have is volatility of the prices. And someone like poor Jeff here is trying to manage his load, and he's got huge fluctuations in prices. It's one thing to have fluctuations in prices month to month, and that makes it hard investment decisions of how to plan your production. Day to day makes it hard. But when you're going minute to minute, it's very, very challenging. It's not like you can unplug your load and plug it back in. It takes time to do that. And I'm not blaming anybody. It's not that the ISO doesn't see that either. We're just trying to come to the root cause of that. It's diminished a little bit since the launch, but it's still a very, very big challenge for our members in terms of managing that volatility. And we're going to have to work very hard with you folks to try to find ways to mitigate that, because it's really tough to manage.
Well, then I'll ask you, when speaking about costs, what pathways or opportunities do you see being available for large industrial consumers to manage their costs?
It's a good question, and I'll speak kind of more generally on it in terms of based on the research that we've been doing and where we see some of the biggest opportunities. But we put out reports maybe like a year and a half, no, half a year ago, where we looked at a lot of these studies out there that are modeling, high electrification pathways and building out electricity systems. We kind of took those and said, all right, these models have all the investments they need to do and the operational costs. What does that actually mean for rates? And that is kind of the analysis I was alluding to earlier, where we're saying, if you're in this high growth environment and we're building out our systems to accommodate that, we're also aligning with net zero, we're building out all these different technologies, there's going to be upward pressure on rates without any sort of mitigating actions. And that's the kind of the critical line, without any sort of mitigating actions, because these models that are out there and the underlying things in them, there's, they're building in a cost optimal pathway, which is good, but we like to say that they're missing a lot of stuff, and we have to build better than the models do. And there's a lot of opportunities that are not in these things to actually bring down those costs. And I think the stuff that peak power does is one of those key things: distributed energy resources, and looking at different, new technologies that are good using and shaping electricity. And I'm sure we're going to know way more on the industrial side of what the specifics are that we can do, but I just know that in general, directionally, the technologies that do these things are getting better and faster than anyone anticipated. Like our ability to find out new ways to shape electricity to benefit the grid and kind of bring these costs down. And I think Ontario and the ISO have done a lot of really good work on this already, is moving in the right direction. Non-wired alternatives is a term that we haven't actually said up here yet, but I'm sure everyone in this room or most folks know what that means, but it's trying to use these technologies to avoid the need to build out transmission and distribution. And those types of things generally not captured in these models, but huge opportunities to bring those cost curves down, both for the individual customer and like the ICI program, but I'd also say for all customers across the board, is that's optimizing the system. You can really reduce that pressure. You can capture these. It's just trying to figure out how to actually do that.
So then turning it back to you, Brad, for commercial and industrial customers, what are you hearing as the first steps that they are taking to, in thinking about addressing some of these challenges, such as storage, forecasting? Can you speak to that?
Well, this is the part where I have to speak about peak power and the solutions. I get it now. I understand this question here.
It wasn't intended
Very,
that way.
very subtle, very subtle. No, it's actually, it's a great question. And I want you to know that our energy members are vigorously looking at every way that they can reduce the challenge of non-competitive electricity prices. Every way that we can tackle this big, huge gorilla that's in the room right now, it's going to require some serious government support, there's no question. Similar to some of the programs that Link and I have been talking about the last few days, it will require a great deal of dedication on the part of government to help transition us through this 7-year period. Those 7 years, what this is, for those of you that are kind of going, what's he talking about? When the Pickering nuclear units come off, and that'll be starting next year and being fully off, I think, by 2027. That backlog of power will need to be filled by natural gas. Very significant increase in cost compared to what the unit that we would be paying into nuclear costs. That's really the bulk of what that causes. So it's a big increase, and then it will slowly, hopefully, go down. But that's 7 years. That's an eternity. That's where that comes from. So yes, we need to work with government. We're going to have to find mitigation strategies with government that can help our industry survive this next little while. But there's also going to be other solutions that are needed. And companies like Peak Power are working with some of our members at looking at alternative ways that they can hedge off that energy cost. Looking at, and I always get the name on the PPAs, corporate PPAs. Let's say what's not the outcome. Corporate power purchase agreements that haven't been too taken up in Ontario, but given the situation, it may mean that we're going to have to take another look at those. It may well be, and Jeff and I were having this conversation earlier, some of the technologies you may have approached industry with 6 months ago or a year ago, that the business case may not have been there. With the advent of these increasing costs and the challenges they're facing, things have shifted. So with every crisis, there comes opportunities. And this is where Jeff and I, one of the reasons we're here, is AMPCO traditionally has been an industrial-based, industrial interest association. We want to learn more and open up a lot of what we do to other stakeholders in the energy sector, so we can work together, because this is a serious challenge that we've got in front of us, but so is the whole transformation that we're going through. And we don't want to just sit back in our industrial buildings and say, this is what we need. We want to be able to work with you to develop solutions to make this work, because we have to make it work for all of us. And I know I got to finish, but I strongly believe there's strength in numbers. Strength in numbers when it comes to developing ideas, strength in numbers when it comes to going to government to try to get something done, and strength in numbers when it comes to working together to make something work. And I think you're going to see Jeff as a relatively new chair, and I'm a new president. We're looking at opening AMPCO up a little more to other stakeholders in the sector.
So certainly this is a multifaceted solution approach that would need to be taken. And actually, Mike, I'll ask you about that. With the IESO, there are a number of programs to manage energy needs. There's demand response, but are there other programs that don't get as much attention that perhaps businesses should pay attention to as they plan out their future?
Absolutely. There's no one solution to the energy transition challenge. We need all the resources, whether it's on the resource side, looking at all the different resources, the attributes and how they contribute to the system. We're looking on the supply side and all the different opportunities we have for reducing demand. So as you may have heard, we've made historic investments in demand side management programming. A lot of those programs are out there now. I'm not sure many have heard of the Peak Perks programs. That's for residential consumers to curtail, say, air conditioning load on hot summer days. So it's the largest virtual plant in the country at about 250 megawatts or so. There's actually a commercial version of this too, commercial HVAC demand response incentive that's going to start registration next spring, and that's looking at having another 250, 260 megawatts of curtailable commercial HVAC load. We'll also be announcing a new industrial energy efficiency program, and this is based on the feedback we've received from all the previous iterations of industrial energy efficiency programs. This program will look at projects that generate at least 600 megawatt hours per year of savings, offering $200 to $300 per megawatt hour a year for those savings. And it's looking at those really complex industrial energy efficiency projects that don't really fit into the mold of any of the existing programs. And based on stakeholder feedback too, we'll be having a 5-year completion period to provide the components of the project a little bit more time to complete those unique solutions.
Okay, well then, Flick, I'll turn to you. You've indicated that provinces should take proactive steps to strengthen interregional coordination to unlock benefits of infrastructure projects. Benefits such as greater reliability, lower costs, lower emissions. So what moves should Ontario make in the next 12 to 18 months to support this coordination to boost overall prosperity?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I would like to say the accelerators is a big attention or a big focus of ours right now is to set the electrons free. And maybe I kind of go back to my earlier answer and maybe also dovetail on what you're saying, Mike, in terms of how we have to use every kind of solution at our fingertips here. Like it's all hands on deck. And we have to build better than the models build. And so another thing that these things kind of commonly leave out, unless we're specifically looking at it, is interconnections and interties between provinces, trying to have more transmission so that you can have electrons flowing back and forth for a bunch of benefits. And I think just to reiterate what you said in your question, there are a bunch of benefits from doing this, especially if we're in an environment where load is going up and we're adding a lot of variable renewables. It's physics. They don't care about provincial boundaries, international boundaries. It just physically works better. And we've, in my opinion, systematically underinvested in that for the last 100 years. We've talked about it. People have been talking about this for the last 100 years. But I think the moment is very close because of this political environment we're in down south. We want to work with our neighbors on all of that, but it's a big opportunity to further build better than we have in the past. A key tool, and I'll say, in Ontario, I know there has been a lot of conversations and a lot of collaboration, especially with Quebec. There's the capacity swap agreements that were announced like a few years ago. A lot of really good things there, but in terms of like the next steps, and especially in this moment where we're finding ourselves wanting to work with our provincial neighbors more and also grow the grid and integrate renewables, is to start being a bit more maybe deliberate and serious about it through more formal planning mechanisms, kind of moving from the ad hoc conversations, which I know, honestly, Ontario is probably one of the best at working with your neighbors, but we work across the country in the West and in Atlantic Canada. I can say there's a lot of progress that can be made in actually implementing more institutionalized processes so that these opportunities are now systematically underinvested in. So some sort of formal planning mechanism kind of bringing that out to the forefront and prioritizing it would be, in my view, really good thing in the next 12 months.
Well, you mentioned capacity swap agreements. Can you give us maybe another example of what this interregional coordination would look like?
It can take a lot of different forms, but ultimately, the capacity swap agreement is really a reliability type of play, right? It's in my opinion, I can speak this a lot better than I, but my understanding is Quebec is winter peaking, we're summer peaking, and we're sharing capacity between those two seasons so that we don't have to build a bunch more power plants in either province to kind of meet those needs. Maybe the other big example that is maybe the headlines right now is unlocking what I'm going to call stranded renewable assets. So you have, I don't know if anyone's seen like the headlines about Wind West or anything like that from Atlantic Canada. I won't opine on like whether like 60 gigawatts of offshore wind is going to happen next year, but the general direction when it comes to that is to say Atlantic Canada has extremely good wind resources. They don't need to build all that to serve their own load, but there's a lot of need for electricity in Quebec. In Ontario, we're seeing that, and so being able to move that from Atlantic provinces to Quebec, to Ontario, to New England, which is also facing the same kind of structural questions we're facing here, is another big opportunity through more interprovincial collaboration.
Mike, did you want to add to that?
Sure, yeah. I appreciate the shout out for the capacity swap agreement. I think it's a great example of provinces working together to take advantage of the complementary nature of our systems. We also see it in market-based transactions. Over the last few years, we've become a net exporter of electricity to Quebec, and in the past, we were a net importer. So as the system's needs evolve, we're able to exchange that with them. Ontario is connected to 5 neighbors electrically. So our 2 provinces, Manitoba, Quebec, as well as the 3 states we border, Minnesota, Michigan, and New York. Between those 5 neighbors, we have over, I think, 6,000 megawatts of interties, and I've been, it's probably about 20 years, it's been more than 20 years since I had my first internship in the sector, and this idea of an east-west grid has come up a few times perennially throughout that. There might be a generational opportunity here, given on what's happening more broadly within Canada, to look more to our neighbors for sharing electricity resources. So, of course, we were working with Quebec and Manitoba to identify potential opportunities to expand that. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with the Integrated Energy Planning Directive, but of course, it's also asked us to enhance that collaboration with our neighbors. So I look forward to continuing that dialogue with especially Manitoba and Quebec to see how we can better leverage the resources that we all share.
Well, thank you. Okay, so Brad, now I'll turn it to you. You've worked at the government and you've seen it from the consumer side. What is one lever that you think the government can pull to make it easier for businesses to adapt to these great changes and to make it impactful?
That's a great question, and I think either Mike or Nick, I can't remember which, said that really there's no silver bullet. So I wish I could reach into my back pocket and go to Premier Ford and say, this is going to solve all our problems. That silver bullet doesn't exist. But that doesn't mean there's not solutions, ideas, and things we can do to mitigate some of the challenges in front of us. And I think back to 2003, and those of you that are old enough to remember that. 2003, we did not have enough power to meet demand for a period of time where we weren't sure we were going to be able to keep the lights on. It took a very significant commitment on the part of the province and everybody involved in the sector to rebuild a lot of our energy infrastructure and to get off the coal at the same time. The single most significant climate change initiative in North America during our lifetimes. We did that here in Ontario. We forget about that. It wasn't that long ago. We're still paying for it now because that wasn't cheap. But we did it. We did it because we set out and we determined to do it. 2008, I remember I'm sitting at a cabinet table. I don't remember. I think I was Minister of Energy at the time. Dwight Duncan's the finance minister. The financial recession had just hit, financial collapse. He looks at us, he looks really down. He eventually says, our revenues have just dropped in half in a month. We're headed for a really bad place. And we've got companies like GM and Chrysler and Ford got away, that were able to handle it on their own. That needed a bailout, $1 billion bailout, shouldn't call it a bailout, $1 billion of assistance from both the federal and provincial governments, or they were going to go down. We found a way. We worked through it. We came out stronger. COVID, same thing. Looked like we were going to be in a horrible mess economically. It was hard. But the decision makers at the time recognized the problem, realized that failure is not an option. They came up with money within a month and supports within a month to keep our businesses going and Canadian and Ontario workers working. Now, in my view, I think we're heading into a similar crisis. My concern is, I feel like we're sleepwalking into it. It's upon us. It's happening now. It's going to be in full force next year. I feel like we're kind of not really recognizing the problem yet. Hence, I have to raise the big gorilla in the room today. And that may not be the fault of anybody. It may be that government decision makers need to learn about this problem and process it. And I suspect that at some point there's going to be a holy crap moment. We got to do something, but we got to get there. We got to get there quick, and it shouldn't have to be us proactively pulling them to the table. They should be reaching out to us in the energy sector to say, find us solutions, because the status quo, we can't. We know what the damage is going to be, and it's too much to endure, and we're going to help our industry and our people through this.
So you're saying there's no silver bullet, but I'll ask you in a different way. If you were at the government today, what is an initiative that you would push for that would support commercial and industrial customers through this period of electrification?
Well, there's no question. I mean, the one thing that we cannot get through this without is some form of rate mitigation. And there's programs we've done in the past that have worked. There's programs now, the NEAP program used to be called NEAR, Northern Industrial Energy Program, rate program. These are, they're not, governments don't like to do them because they take some money out of ratepayers, and there's an impact on general revenues. But there's no way we can deal with this level of magnitude of increases and get through it intact without something like that. So that would be the primary tool, but we're not going to just say that's all we're going to do. We're going to wait for government to help us out. We're going to sit down with all you folks and figure out what else can we do to make our energy infrastructure more effective and efficient. What other technologies are out there that maybe we haven't seen? Now the business case for storage. with increasing costs. I think it's probably, I hate to say there's good things about that, but the one good thing for people like Derek is it gives you a business case where your costs are higher if you don't have a hedge and maybe some behind the meter storage capability or other generating solutions. So there are, and the use of AI, which most of our companies are using, but are we using it to the degree that we could? Are there better things, more things we can? I know there are more things we can do with AI. So does Nick. That we can be more efficient and better. So it's not just let's leave this to government to solve the problem, but it is without government stepping in big time and working with us on this, it's going to be a challenge.
Well, thank you, Brad, and Mike, and Nick. I'll turn to Jonathan just to do a time check. I think we can turn into questions from the audience now. Okay.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so let's turn it to the audience here. Thank you all. That was a really great discussion already. I know there's probably some questions. So does anybody want to ask? I see a hand up here.
This is a bit of a structural question, but we've got the IESO doing an RFP at the moment for LT2 for front-of-the-meter battery systems. There is a significant amount of projects, well beyond 3 to 5 times as much as what is currently being requested for in projects that are going to be submitted to this RFP, that are not going to be awarded because there's only a certain amount of power that's being called. There is maybe a solution we now can do virtual power projects from a generation standpoint. What would be the opposition to a virtual power plant from a storage standpoint between industrial producers and distributed storage across the province, together with the IESO, with the gluttony of opportunity of storage projects that could be developed, but maybe the commitments could come from industrial power sector? Is that possible?
So I know there's also the corporate power purchase agreement program, and there's opportunities for behind the meter generation. So the other challenge that we have with storage, so we recently released a technical paper, you can find it on our website. It's called the Effective Load Carrying Capability of Storage. Very, very boring name, but what effective load carrying capability essentially is the amount of reliability that you can get out of a resource. So you can imagine something like wind, first wind turbine you build, you get a ton of reliability out of it. You build more and more and more, you're just getting more power at the same time, so then each incremental wind turbine, if you do nothing else, it declines. And you guys do the same thing with storage. So the first unit of storage you build, it takes advantage of the best opportunities, the lowest overnight rates to charge, the highest daytime rates to discharge. As you build more and more of that, if nothing else changes on the system, then the storage itself starts to flatten out that curve. So we went out to about 3,000 megawatts of 4-hour duration storage. That was it's an order of magnitude higher than the rest of grid storage in Canada combined. First I have to acknowledge that Ontario has already gone far beyond the rest of the country combined. So part of the study says that, well, hey, look, once you build those 3,000 megawatts of storage, you start to take advantage of the best opportunities. And the next megawatt you build, you're going to get less reliability from it. So in LT2, the way that was accommodated for was now looking at 8-hour storage. In LT2, there will also be an energy-producing resource stream. And what we really need to do is see what comes through that. I think one of the challenges we have as planners is that our procurements are resource agnostic. So we don't know what's going to get through. If we knew we were going to get 2,000 megawatts of wind and it's going to be in northwestern Ontario from that, we could plan around that. But we're going to get some mix of solar and wind and maybe some other resources through that energy stream. They're going to be all over the province or maybe clustered somewhere. So we really need to kind of take a look and do that modeling to then assess, what kind of storage product would we need after that. So that doesn't directly answer the virtual power plant question, but I think there's sort of a broader question about the evolving nature of the value of incremental storage after you start to see that penetration on the grid increases.
So more submissions would help you form that decision for future planning needs.
Yeah, exactly. So as we've talked a lot about the growth and the scale of the build out, and as you start to build out those other resources, then you'll start to see that value of storage start to increase again. It's kind of build a little bit of storage. You need a little bit more wind, solar, nuclear to charge that storage. You need a little bit more storage. But there's this lag between when you do the procurement, it's resource agnostic, challenging to model, do the modeling. So you can imagine that that iterative cycle actually takes a couple of years to go through.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah.
My name is Dave Chan. I work for Solar Power Canada. This one is directed to Mike. You mentioned the decommissioning Pickering Ocean is short life. What's in the pipeline to replace that amount of nuclear energy that we're going to be losing? Can you say?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that's actually at the core of a lot of what we've been talking about when you see significant changes in the energy market when you lose all the baseload electricity from Pickering. So there's a few initiatives, and we had just mentioned our long-term procurements, so we'll go a little bit deeper into those. So we had our long-term one and our expedited long-term procurements, which procured those 3,000 megawatts of storage. We now have a second long-term procurement that's going out and buying 7,500 megawatts of resources altogether, and capacity resources, and then there's also an energy stream of those. And we have to balance the extent to which we have the capacity and the energy producing resources. Aside from that, we're also starting a long lead time procurement. So this acknowledges that those other procurements have a pretty short development cycle. It's only a few years, so you can build wind and solar storage in that time frame. You can't build a hydro dam, you can't build some of the long duration energy storage technology in those time frames. So we have a long lead time procurement program to attract some of those resources that don't fit into those conventional streams. We also have a local generation procurement to recontract some of the renewable assets that we have that are existing, and then we have a medium term and capacity option, which also helps to procure some of the shorter term resources that you need in that time frame. On the government policy side, so we have Powering Ontario's growth plan that was released a couple of years ago, and a lot of those commitments were reiterated in the integrated energy plan. So one of those resources is looking at having Pickering itself come back after a period of refurbishment, but of course that doesn't help while it's being refurbished. The plan also calls for 4 small modular reactors at the Darlington site. So we built those into the base case, and then we base all these other procurements on top of that. So there's a lot of active procurements. I think procuring pretty much every type of electricity resource you can imagine. It's certainly currently commercially viable.
I'm going to touch that one as well. I feel like I'm usually a positive guy. Like seriously, usually I was delivering positive messages, and like skunk meat garden party today for some reason. But this isn't actually being negative. It's just being real. That Pickering refurbishment, which I would be doing, they don't have a choice. If the decision might have been made like a long time ago, maybe there would have been time to build some new nuclear, and maybe that was the way to go. Some of the room would say, no, we should be all renewables. There might be a difference of opinion on that, but because of the time and the need the need for the power that's going to have to be there, refurbishment of nuclear is kind of their only option at this point that most of us can see. So this is not a criticism of the government for doing it, but the reality is the refurbishment of Darlington units and Bruce was a major project that had never been done before, and they were newer units, and they were done really well. I mean, a rare case, I would say, globally of major projects being done so far on time and maybe even under budget. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, it's pretty spectacular, and there's reason for that. There was a lot of planning done up front on those projects, and I think it really helped. So we did a really good job at that. Pickering's different. Much older technology. There may be some more risks there in doing that. So I don't say that to bring a damper to the party here. I just think we need to go in eyes wide open, knowing that let's take it as it comes. We're not out of the woods if Pickering gets refurbished, and certainly during that time, we're not going to have loads to power if we don't do something about the competitiveness of the energy prices during that period.
Awesome. think we have time for maybe one or two more questions.
I just wanted to know what do you think is the role for public sector generation utilities? Because I see electricity as becoming a commodity like housing, right? There's low supply, the demand's increasing, and it's in the benefit of private generation utilities to increase their rates, right, for their shareholders. So decentralized energy, cooperative solar, cooperative energy, where do you see that being part of the conversation?
Well, you're talking about local distribution companies, by and large?
Yeah, generation companies as well, public sector generation companies, yeah.
Well, honestly, I was a liberal when I was in office, so I played both sides of that fence and do it very well. I think there's definitely a role for public involvement in the energy sector. You know, it does bring some greater accountability. What we've lacked, though, and the challenge we've had, when you look at how our energy sector has morphed its way along and how we've latched on ideas as the government's changed and come in with new ideas and changed the old ones, we're left with one of the most complex energy system in the entire, all of North America. I would say, Jeff, wouldn't you? We're pretty complicated. Pretty complicated. Hard energy system to manage, hard energy system to work with it. The good news is we're the cleanest in North America, pretty much, and we have pretty reliable power compared to a lot. We've invested in a lot of our technology. I would say, though, that private sector acumen in some of these, even if it's in some of these public organizations, is absolutely necessary. My view is, as somebody who's kind of been involved in the sector at a high level, not in ministry level, it's a high level. I don't mean high like stature level, I mean high like you don't know what the hell's going on sometimes down where the wires are, that high. But it's, my read would be that moving towards more of a public sector approach with Hydro One has made them a better organization. That private sector acumen helps. There has to be accountability. And in my view, in energy, unlike something like healthcare, in energy, we have the Ontario Energy Board. You can't do anything without getting approval from the Ontario Energy Board. So I think we have what do you call it, a safeguard if privatization does come more and more into energy. I can tell you one thing, and Nick, I don't know if your experience is the same, but I've tried to help. I've always had a passion for innovative companies, and I've tried to help some bring innovation to our energy sector. It's damn hard. It's a very slow sector to evolve. That private sector mentality that they have in the U.S., a lot of our companies end up going down there and make a go of it because it's quicker decisions and more incentives, that profit-based decision, to make decisions that are going to make you money and maybe take a little more risk than here where you, it's about getting something built on time, on budget, do it the same old way. We've always done it because God knows let's not take a risk of a new way of doing something. So that's a really good way of playing both sides of the fence, isn't it? But that's kind of where I'm at.
I might just add on to that and dovetail off from some of the things that we've been working on and seeing, but I think there's no necessarily one right pathway. There's a lot of different ways to kind of build out the system and think about how do we build this in the future. And I think maybe to also get to your point about negativity, like one thing I like to say too is we've built this fast and we've met these challenges in the past before. We've actually built faster. So there's no physical limit, but we're obviously in different environments. And there's a lot of different challenges, but we have a lot of solutions. And I think looking at different ways, like business models, entities to participate in the system is going to be a really key tool for that. And not necessarily public utilities, that can be one part of it. But one thing I'll mention as well too is Indigenous participation, Indigenous nations as well. A lot of work we're doing right now, especially in the West, is looking at Indigenous-led electricity infrastructure and creating ways for much stronger Indigenous participation in the electricity infrastructure development, as well as even Indigenous utilities and those types of things. Looking at different ways to kind of get different, market actors involved in this. And I think that spans from communities, indigenous nations, rights holders, public power, private entities. It's a combination of everyone. Like, I like to say that the electricity system is like the most complicated system in the world. There's so many different components to it, and I think we get really in the weeds here in terms of markets and the technology and things like that. But going back to Mike's answer at the very beginning, like, these are also social systems. It's people building these. It's communities and indigenous nations where this infrastructure is running through, and those are critical components that we have to think about in the system too. So bringing in other entities is another way to kind of do this better as we go into the future, and a lot of times do it faster that way too.
Amazing, thank you. So Brad, you're the partier, I'm the party pooper. We do have to cut off questions, we're short on time here. But please join me in getting this wonderful panel round of applause.